Whether we predominantly use Tonex software or Tonex pedal, Tonex has a fairly simple signal path. We have our amp model in our cab. We have a simple noise gate that's quite effective. We have a really effective EQ that I did a video about in last week's episode of A Beginner's Guide to Tonex. And we have also what I feel just might be one of the most powerful and useful tools and effects blocks that we have in Tonex, and that is the compressor. Now, I have talked briefly about this in past videos, but I wanted to do a full-blown beginner's guide to Tonex video concerning the compressor because it's just as easy to use any compressor incorrectly, but there's a couple special things we have to be, shall we say, extra aware of when using Tonex as far as balancing our volumes, where we place the compressor, and just how we should dial it in so that we're not getting negative effects from it, because it is very easy to do just as much damage if using a compressor that's not set up properly as it is to use a compressor in a very successful way that will add to our tones and give us better results. So without further ado, we're going to head on over to Tonex within my Cubase DAW, and we'll take a look and see if we can't get this compressor to do exactly what we need and want it to do. All right, so here we are over in Tonex, and I have my JS Rect Z Ultimate tone model bundle pulled up here, and more specifically, my Rect Z Alt 3 model, which is going to be kind of a pushed well into the edge of break-up tone model based off of my incredible Dr. Z Z-Rec Junior amp, which you probably see sitting up here over my shoulder. I'm hoping that shows up on camera, but what an incredible amp that is. And these are truly some of my favorite tone models to play around with, especially with a Tele style guitar, but they actually work really well with anything. I will have a link below to both the free tone model on my website and on ToneNet for one of the sample tone models from the Rect Z bundle. And I'll also have a link below to my website where you can grab the whole tone model bundle. And later in the video, I'll show you a video demo of these tones being used in a mix. But anyways, let's get back to the topic at hand. So as you see up here, I have a preset set up here, which is included with the bundle. I have a noise gate on, threshold set, just so there's no noise if I have my guitar turned up. We hear it kind of cancels the sound out. We have our reverb at the end where I have a little tiny room reverb just to give it a little bit of room ambience. My advanced parameters are basically flat across the board here. This is just as it was captured. I have the cab that was captured with this and the amp model. But now we come to our compressor. Now, let's take a look at what we have here. It's a fairly simple compressor. We can obviously turn it on and off. We can use it in post or pre. Now, this is going to be extremely important because where we position the compressor in the signal chain is going to really determine how we can use it and what we should and shouldn't do with it. And we'll talk more about it in a moment. We have the threshold, which is basically going to be setting the level at which the compressor will actually start to act, where it will start compressing the signal. I have this set right now at minus 10.5. If I had this at 0, it really shouldn't sound any different if I have the compressor on or off, except for the gain boost. So actually, if I come over here and change this from the 3 to the 0 that I have, it shouldn't have any dramatic effect on the tone. Now, I had this, I believe, set at minus 10.5, which should give a little bit of compression, as we can tell by this gain reduction meter, which we will talk about in a second. So if I bring this down, you'll see the gain reduction meter is not moving. I can then bring this up to a point where it starts acting. So let's jump over to the gain reduction meter. What is this telling us? This is telling us how much the compressor is acting on the signal, how much compression is being applied, how many dB of gain reduction is being applied once we pass that threshold we've set over here. So in this preset, I have this set at minus 10.5 because it's giving me the appropriate amount of compression. So the gain control is going to allow us to compensate for any changes the compressor is making to our volume. Obviously, if we crank this way up, we're going to be getting a lot more gain reduction, not necessarily something that's good or that we would want, but we're going to be able to adjust the gain up or down to get to the final volume that we want. So the gain is just going to be basically a volume control to compensate for any compression that's done. And we have the attack. Now this is going to tell us how quickly the compressor is going to squash down on the signal once it passes that threshold we've set. So if we set this so it's super long, you'll actually notice that we don't, at this threshold, actually get any compression anymore. We've told the compressor not to act for far too long, and it's just not compressing. So we'd have to bring our threshold way up. And what that'll do is basically let more of my initial pick attack and transient through. So maybe we want to hear that versus hearing that squash down on. You'll hear that initial transient is kind of not there, whereas if I put this way up, the pick attack is more apparent. Now, I like to kind of run this down fairly low so that it does kind of jump on the note right away. And one of the reasons I like doing that is because I use my compressor very sparingly and subtly. So I was down here at minus 10.5. I had this at gain at 3. So basically at these settings, which are the settings I decided on for this particular tone model, it sounds like this. If I hit very softly, compressor doesn't even get to work. But as I hit harder, it works a little bit, just the amount that I want. Now let's talk about pre and post. So what does this pre-post button do? Well, when it's turned off, the compressor is now before the amp model. So it goes noise gate, into the compressor, into the amp model. Now this could potentially be a problem. Let's say that I set this to get fairly heavy compression. You're going to notice something. When I crank this gain up or lower it, the tone structure of the amp is going to be different because we are hitting the front end of the amp with a different amount of signal. Therefore, the amp is going to distort or break up more or less. So kind of similar to using the gain knob to adjust the input of the signal hitting the front of the amp. If I was to turn the gain way down in front of the amp and crank my volume up here on the amp, you'll notice the amp model cleaned up a lot versus if I had the gain cranked before the amp with my volume down here. That is not the way that that tone model was actually supposed to sound. The actual tone model sounded like this. So we can see now if we're not careful, just by putting the compressor before the amp model, we can really change the amount of gain of our tone model and the amount of signal hitting the front of the amp. So we'd want to be very careful with that. If you notice you're using your compressor in pre, and getting more overdrive and distortion, you're going to have to bring your gain down to the appropriate level. And then compensate by bringing your output volume or model volume up. Now if I turn that compressor on and off, we can actually tell what the compressor's doing. not saying that this is a setting I actually like or would use, but I'm just showing what can happen if we use it before. So if we're using it before the amp model, like a lot of folks would in that traditional sort of way, maybe we want kind of more of that kind of funky, squashed compression, or that country chicken picking style compression. We just have to be mindful that we can possibly hit the front of the amp model a little too hard and change the overall gain structure of it. So in this particular situation, we cannot use this gain control to balance the overall volume of our preset or our tone model, simply because we're going to be hitting the front of the amp model with that, and that's going to affect the final outcome. In that case, we would want to use our model volume to adjust the final volume. That's whether we're on the software or the pedal. Now, if I change this to post, everything changes. Now what we have to be careful of, and let's go back to our settings that we had here for this preset. I'm going to go minus 10.5, and I had this at plus 3. This is where we were. And that is the way I intended this to sound. Now we have to be careful if we want to raise the volume of our whole preset to not utilize the model volume, because now we have our compressor after the amp. Any change in volume on the amp is going to change the amount of compression we get, and will probably require us to come and change the threshold. So let's take a look and see how much gain reduction here I'm getting. Just a slight bit. Now watch what happens if I crank my model volume up. We don't get as big a jump in volume as we thought, although we do get some, but we do get a lot more compression. That would not give me the intended results that I was hoping for from that compressor, because we now hit the front of the compressor with more volume, which then affects the threshold. If I was to do this, I would need to come over here and bring this threshold back. We could do that, but that would really be a step that wouldn't be overly necessary. What we actually could do then, when using the compressor in post after the amp, we can just use our gain control here on the compressor as our final output volume. So if I find that that's not loud enough, and I'm actually even clipping because I moved it way too high there, but just as an example. So if you heard any digital distortion, that's why. We would never want to run it that high. Or maybe we found my original 3 setting too much. Now I can use this gain control as my final output volume control when I'm set in post. So to recap, when set in pre, we cannot use this gain control as our final output volume because we're hitting the front of the amp, and any change in the gain is going to affect how much overdrive distortion we get out of our amp. It's going to affect that gain structure of the tone model. In that case, we would want to utilize the model volume control for our final output volume. In the case of using it in post, we would not want to use the model volume, simply because that's then going to affect how the compressor is dialed in and give us maybe more or less compression depending on how we use the model volume. What we would want to do to control our overall output volume would be to just use this gain control in our compressor to raise or lower the overall output volume of our tone model or our preset. The settings I like are basically what you're seeing here. A lot of times I'll leave my attack at 1 simply because I'm not using a lot of overt compression. And I do like it to kind of jump on that signal in a faster fashion. Now, if you don't like that, then you can raise this to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Use your ears, whatever suits you the best. By no means am I ever saying that the settings I use are the be all and end all or the ones that have to be followed. Everybody's going to have different tastes and ideals. I'm just giving you starting points and letting you know that when changing these parameters, what outcome it's going to actually have. So we can mess with that. I like it here. I like to set that threshold, like I said, so I'm just getting a tiny little bit of movement on the gain reduction meter. I would love to actually have a reading on this that tells me how many dB of gain reduction I'm getting. I like to aim usually for 1 or 2 dB of gain reduction, just so it's kissing the sound on the peaks. And then I just use my gain control to set the final output of the tone model or preset that I'm working with. All right, so I hope I covered everything that needed to be covered there as far as the use of the compressor, but you can see that there's a lot of settings in there that could really potentially cause us a lot of problems and actually could be the source of a lot of folks' issues that they have when utilizing the compressor. You know, if you are having an issue where things aren't sounding right, try turning the compressor off at first to see if that kind of rectifies any of the problems. And then if you still want compression on, bring it in and try adjusting some of the settings and things we talked about. If you were in pre, maybe set it to post and see if that doesn't fix some of your problems. Or if you need it to be in the pre setting, then just be mindful of the different controls so that we are going to get what we want out of the compressor. So I hope that that was helpful. Today I am going to leave you with the demo video from my Rec Z Ultimate Tone Model Bundle so you can hear how all of the tone models from that bundle sound together when combined in a mix. This was a fun little country-ish kind of Brent Mason inspired piece of music that I had a blast putting together. So I hope that that was helpful. The links are below to both the free tone model on my website and on ToneNet, and the full bundle, which is available on my website if you're so inclined and want to help support the channel. I really do appreciate that. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and sharing your time with me. Please like the video, share it with anybody you think would get some use or enjoyment out of watching it. Also, please subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell notification, get notified when I put new content out. I'll be back really soon with some more. Thank you guys again so much for sharing your time with me, and I hope you enjoy this little piece of music.